Welcome, everybody. Again, I'm Dave Harmon. I'm the Executive Director at George Wright Society. We're really excited and glad to have all of you with us today for our meeting. I'm going to now turn the proceedings over to Dave Reynolds, who's the president of the George Wright Society, and he will welcome us to the meeting and get the program off and running. So Dave, please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Again, I've been the president of the George Wright Society for the past year and a half, and I am really delighted to be here. The first or the last George Wright members meeting was held in 2017 at the last biennial conference that we had in Norfolk, Virginia. And of course, a lot has happened since that time, not to mention the pandemic. So I just wanted to say that on behalf of the board, we certainly hope that you and your families have been able to weather the storm well and we're able to stay relatively healthy and will continue to stay healthy. It's been I should ask everyone to mute their audios if possible, so that we don't have feedback. The purpose of this meeting is really threefold. One is to have a guest speaker give a presentation that would be of use to people, anybody working in parks, protected area management. Our guest speaker will be introduced following this introduction. That's Philip McAdoo. The second part is to just give you highlights of the work that the Society has been doing based on the development of our strategic plan. We couldn't cover everything, and we wanted to be respectful of your time, so we've limited this time to about an hour and 15 minutes. As Dave Harmon mentioned earlier, this will be recorded. So if you have to get off early, or if you know of people who can't make it, you can refer them to the fact that it's being recorded, and I think we'll be putting it up on our website or other sites as well for them to take a look at. And what I can do now is really just move into a quick introduction of our board. Since 2017, we've added quite a few new members to our board, and I think we have an excellent board. We have a very dynamic group of people who are really putting in a lot of hard work and time. So let me move right into that, and I'd like to start off with the kind of in alphabetical order, asking people to basically just introduce themselves, or quickly introduce themselves, a job title, their affiliation, work that they do, and then where they're from. I guess I should start off. Again, I'm Dave Reynolds. I'm retired from the National Park Service, was with them for 37 years, worked primarily in natural resource management and science, mainly in the East in the regional offices. And I've done during that time, about 7 or 8 years of international work as well. And I continue to serve on the board of the International Union for Conservation of Nature's U.S. Executive Committee. Mariella, you're next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Mariella Fernandez. I'm currently a professor here at Clemson University. I examine lack of access to green spaces in marginalized communities, particularly the Latinx community. And I have also been involved in other projects, for example, implicit bias trainings and youth development trainings, and a little bit on food insecurity. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Rick Harris.
Okay, I'm hoping there's not massive feedback here. I apologize if there is. I'm Rick Harris, 34 years of federal service, retired from the National Park Service in 2013. Spent most of my career in natural resources and science with a stint in the Washington office and a stint as superintendent. And since I've been retired, I've been working mostly on issues here where I live in New Mexico to create national monuments here and establish wilderness areas, as well as working on water issues for wild and scenic river status and other issues that deal with water diversion.
Thank you, Rick. Akibia, you're next.
All right. Unlike Dave and Rick, I'm not retired from the National Park Service, but I am a former employee of the National Park Service, left to start my PhD at Clemson, and I am the student rep to the board.
Okay, thank you. And Brian Peterson.
Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Brian Peterson. I'm a professor at Kansas State University, and I research human dimensions of natural resources. And before getting into academia, I served as a supervisor at the California Conservation Corps. And happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Kalani Kyocho is next.
Hey, aloha nui kako. Greetings everyone from Hilo, Hawaii, on the island of Hawaii, close to the volcano Kilauea. I serve as the Native Hawaiian Program Specialist for NOAA Office of National Marine Sanctuaries for Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument and World Heritage Site. And I'm very interested and engaged in Indigenous contributions to all of these global and local initiatives regarding our protected areas. So mahalo nui. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kalani. One of our board members that couldn't make it today is Jim Simon. He's an executive director of a nonprofit that supports people with mental disabilities, but he's also had many other jobs, and one of them spending 20 years as a parks and protected area consultant in Western Canada. He lives in Manitoba, Canada, and he can't be here because his organization is undergoing a surprise audit right now, so we understand. Okay, next person is Nadine Spence.
Thanks, Dave. Uklas Kleta, Hestakshik, Ahusaksus, New Channel at Toops Mamuk, Parks Canada. So my name is Nadine Spence, and I am Parks Canada's representative on the George Wright Society Board. And in my day job, I am the executive director of operations for the British Columbia and Yukon region of Parks Canada. It's a pleasure to be part of this organization.
Thank you. And Terry Thomas.
Hello, everyone. I am a retired National Park Service Natural Resource and Science professional, 34 years now. I serve as Vice President of the George Wright Society Board, and I come to you from beautiful Marin County, California, where I'm still involved with Golden Gate National Recreation Area and Point Reyes National Seashore Communications and Issues.
Thank you, Terry. And Jen Thompson.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Thompson, and I am part of the faculty in the College of Forestry and Conservation at the University of Montana. And my work focuses a lot on protected area management, sustainable tourism, and large landscape conservation. And so really excited to be here and to continue working with the board.
Thanks. Bill Walker.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bill Walker. I'm the Cultural Resources Manager with Three Rivers Park District. We're a special park district in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and I'm glad you're all joining us today.
Okay, thanks. Mike Walton.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Mike Walton. I'm speaking to you today from Whitehorse, Yukon, in the traditional territories of the Tonquachan Council and Kwanlundun First Nation. It's really great to be here. I'm also an adjunct professor at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and I'm an independent consultant working on protected areas here in BC, Yukon, and Alberta. Great to be here.
Oops, thank you. That's it. So we are going to move on to the speaker. I was a little premature there. So I'm going to ask Mariella to introduce Philip McAdoo, our guest speaker. And I will stop sharing so we can have Philip speak. If you want to go on, anyway, Philip, if you want to go ahead and start speaking, that'd be great.
Well, let me introduce
Oh,
you.
yeah.
Hi everyone. I have the pleasure to introduce our special speaker. So Philip McAdoo is the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and he has so many wonderful accomplishments. So I picked out a few. So Philip has been able to spearhead many professional development initiatives to foster an understanding around race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, and social economic diversity. He has also developed and implemented new transgender, nonconforming, and recruitment policies. And he created a Native American Education and Equity program, which engaged Michelle Obama in the project. He has many published works, including the books Independent Queers, LGBTQ Educators, and Independent Schools Speak Out, and Every Child Deserves. So I will also be in charge of monitoring the Q&A for Philip. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them out and we'll get to them at the end of the session. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Philip now. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Wow, I keep forgetting whenever I see myself without hair that, it just reminds me of COVID. In full disclosure, it was a dare. If you don't have hair, people make all kinds of rude comments. And then when somebody's like, oh, it must be sad that you can't grow your hair, I'm like, I choose to shave my hair because it's easier. So anyway, all that to me say it's nice to be here with you all. And I'm really looking forward to just sharing with you some of the work that Earth Justice has been doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's been a really hard year for a lot of reasons. I know as a diversity practitioner, this work feels heavy most of the time, but over the last year, it really has created a renewed focus on the work and how important it is. And if you do the work every day, you know how important it is. And if you've lived through these lenses, you again know how deeply emotion driven and anxiety wrought some of these discussions are. So to be able to be in an organization that prioritizes diversity, equity, and inclusion, to be able to be in an organization that really challenges me as a practitioner. I think one of the things that we talk about a lot is just how to keep up with the language around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what's really great is that people and individuals are starting to find the words and the language to talk about their experiences that they didn't have before, which leaves old people like me going, whoa, what's going on? I grew up, it was just black and white, it was gay or straight, and I'm from the South. So there were all kinds of other things that were really identified or just tied to your identity that felt limiting. And so to be able to spend time with young people and to see how they talk about themselves and to do the thing that you said you would never do, I'd never say, oh, back when I was your age. And so I find myself saying that, and young people look at me like, what are you talking about? But also being really mindful of the different ways that things are shifting right before our eyes, and to stay curious about what's happening. And that's really difficult. I know I try to model that all the time. And a lot of this work is really grounded on listening. And so we have open forums in the way that we structure our meetings, the way that we structure our DEI work is really about coming together and creating space to talk And it's really hard to enter into those spaces without judgment, because oftentimes it's just not a part of our lived experience. And for some of us, it's just such a different way of thinking about life, thinking about identity, that it's hard not to place judgment. But I've found that in those moments when really able to lean in and to listen, it really helps to focus the work, because we all come with such different stories, and there are people who saying it looks this way and looks that way. And so in some way, and thinking about the events of last year around the racial justice, the calls for equity and social justice, and thinking about that in the context of the environmental movement, it was really an opportunity for us to expand the way we look at our work, to expand our mission between land, wildlife, healthy communities, and really include people, and to really expand what justice meant like. And so we spent the last year as an organization just trying to think about, okay, we made this commitment to racial justice. We made this commitment to Black Lives Matter. Now, what does that have to do with our work around sharks, for example? That was one of my most fascinating conversations, because we're working on a shark case. And I met with our land, wildlife, and oceans teams. And she said, I know this is about sharks, but I want to build in this reflection point to really think about the communities that are impacted by this work, the communities that are impacted by what we are about to propose. And the same was true when we were looking at some work around some small fishing villages. And we were like, we know that the nets, we want to have a conversation about the safety of the nets, but we also want to understand the impact that we're having on communities who depend on the work, who depend on the food. And so we've really built in these wonderful reflection points on how we do our work, on how we partner with communities, on how we've even gone so far as to challenge our language around partnership. I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago, and there was someone there who was speaking. He said, we don't look at our partners as partners anymore. We look at them as leaders, like they're leaders in the community. I think something as simple as a shift in how we name and how we talk about can really expand the work. And I'll tell you, the biggest challenge or obstacle that we have is that our organization internally, staff members feeling like these big commitments to combat racism and to support Black Lives Matter didn't necessarily reflect what people were experiencing internally. Even though we're an organization of 44% people of color, there were Black staff of color who were saying, how are we going to do this if internally there's still systems of white supremacy operating? And it was, it's taken us 2 years to be able to say white supremacy and everyone stay in the room, right? And for white people to understand the context, that we're not necessarily saying, these violent actions that are obviously for white supremacy, but we're talking about systems and practices that really valued whiteness and devalued anything else. And so it's taken us a long time to be able to sit in the language of DEI and to be able to agree to disagree on some terms, but also just to be able to come to a shared understanding of how we move forward, how we present to our peers, how we present to our partners. And I think the next level of this work will continue to be to ask ourselves some really difficult questions. I had a mentor explain to me that, what we're seeing now is a natural evolution of this work, because years ago, it was all about diversity. What is difference? Making sure that there were different people in different spaces. And that evolved to women, putting a lot of women in leadership, making sure that there were initiatives that were created to support and honor the perspective of women. And so now we're at the point where we didn't think about what the inclusion piece would look like. It sounds really great, but what does it mean to sit in an organization where there are predominantly women, there are predominantly staff of color? And so how do you start to unpack those systems in a truly equitable way to create a sense of belonging? And for me, my biggest talking point was like, but we're 44% people of color this year, but we're almost 50% people of color. And yes, we are. And that's when the work really starts, because those are more people holding spaces and coming together to add their voices to this cause. And that means you have to take a deeper investment in people, a deeper investment in the things that impact them in their day-to-day experiences. And when I'm at my most frustrated, I go back to my own words, which often is grounded in, creating initiatives, creating a way of doing this work that really meets people and the things that impact them in their day-to-day experiences. So you can come to work knowing that you're going to be fully seen and fully heard. And that's difficult because we have 450 people who are saying things differently. I'll give you an example. We had a town hall meeting and someone said, I come from this place where we would bring in bunny rabbits. And so at some point during the day, we would all pass out bunny rabbits. And then they went on to say, and I think we all should make, $30,000 a year. There should be equity across the organization. And so after the meeting, someone said to me, why didn't you just shoot that down? I said, because part of it is just giving people the space. And I don't like saying safety, but that comes up a lot, the safe space to just say what they need to say. And I don't want to become defensive in that moment. And sometimes people just need to say it. Maybe in that moment they realize, okay, we may not do this, but at least I've said this and that's out there. So really approaching this work in a non-defensive way, I think has been the most eye-opening to me. And then once we have a shared understanding internally, it really starts to impact the way that we show up in our partners, the way that we show up for our communities that we work alongside. And that's, again, was a big call internally for us to start to practice what we preach in a way that we were entering to our work in a really authentic way. I say it also doesn't have that we're an organization of a lot of lawyers who like to go back and forth and are really deep thinkers. And so when you're thinking about the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it really is about, for us, I said to one of my attorneys who's just really stuck, and I said, we've done some amazing work for these communities around coal. We've done some really great advocacy work. Think about the way that you care for your partners. Think about the ways that you enter in those communities. We just want you to then be able to internally practice those same skills, those same empathetic ways of looking at those relationships internally, and how we work with people and how we advocate for people. And that's starting to resonate a lot within the organization. But I think the biggest challenge will be, and always will be, is around language. Like what do we use? We had we do our pronouns whenever we do a formal meeting. We make sure that people introduce themselves and they say their pronouns. And this person next to me, she introduced herself, she used her pronouns, and then she looked at me, she's like, why did I do that? The fact that she was willing to do and to be inclusive, but she had no idea what that means. So that started a whole conversation on, what it means to be a trans individual and how we create space and belonging and connection, so that when you say your pronouns, you're automatically signaling to someone who identifies as transgender that you understand or that you are open to their ways of being. And as I think about, the work that we're doing in terms of, we just had Caroline Finney here. Do you all know her and her work? She's amazing, Jen. Yeah, I will. If someone will reach out to me, we just did a webinar with Caroline Finney, and it was recorded, just talking about people of color in the environment. And it was such a beautiful talk. It was Carolyn and Abby, and I was just there kind of moderating, just watching the two of them talk about the way people of color show up in green spaces and the advocacy that's needed for that, and the assumptions that we make, and I will say, my running joke was always that these are things that Black people don't do. And it's like, oh, we don't camp, we don't do these things. And yet, my partner and I adopted a little boy. And the first thing that he wanted to do in his first night in our home was to camp in the backyard. And so we went to Target and we were in Georgia at the time. So camping in a hot backyard in Georgia. But since then, we travel with a tent. And then we just jump on the plane, and our favorite place to go is Puerto Rico, just to be out on the beach. But to really, as an older person, at the time we adopted my son, I was in my 40s, but to really discover nature and to discover what that meant. You know, I'm from the South. I grew up on a farm. My mother grew up on a farm. Until this day, she will not drink or eat anything organic. And I was like, Mom, you do realize that Grandma grew all of our food, right? You do realize that coming home and everything that we got, it was organic, but this just that mentality and that level of education, I think that we need to do in order to really shift the conversations and the ways that we engage people of color, and in my example, Black folks, around the environment and the work that's happening there. So I'm really excited that as an organization, we've made this commitment to be better. We've made this commitment to not only to no longer talk about environmental justice and racial justice as two separate things, but to really think about the ways that they're connected and the ways that they ground us and the ways that they help us to do better and to be better. And I'm more than happy to share, you know, today and moving forward, any of the stuff that we're doing, you know, lessons learned. You know, I always say that, you know, best practices can't be your solutions because things look different in really different organizations. But the number one thing that I'm finding in this work is that people haven't been able to create spaces to have conversations. And I know people say talk is talk, but I think if you get comfortable talking about the work of DEI and talking about it from your different vantage points, then you start to see some results. And I'm proud to say that's what we're starting to see now. Again, we're almost 50% people of color in a green organization, which is really great. And now we're starting to really do the hard part in terms of how we show up, thinking about how we show up for our partners, but also the work that we're doing for ourselves. And I'm going to pause there because I think the best parts of these conversations when I'm able to engage you around some of your questions. So if folks have some questions, I'm more than happy to share. And Jen or Davis, someone can reach out to me and I can follow up with our development team and send you all the link to the talk that we did with Carolyn, which was really, really great. And it may help you all just in terms of thinking of connections and some of the work that you're trying to do and some of the things that we're thinking about. Dave, if you'll do that, remind me. Great. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I just want to remind everyone that you can go ahead and chat out your questions and I will go ahead and read them out loud. But for Philip, the first question is, how do you advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion when members of an organization don't understand its importance?
Yeah. You know, I think, you know, one of the easier ways, not easier ways, but one of the proven ways has always been around data. You know, when I was working in schools, for example, we would hear about the different experiences that girls, for example, were having in math classes. And so I would always look at the data and I would go into those spaces where those teachers were the most resistant. And I would say, this is what the data show, and this is what I'm seeing from my vantage point. What are you seeing? You know, is this ring true in your classroom? And you'd be amazed at people because they're so protective of their classroom. And they're like, oh, some people are like, oh, I never thought of it that way. Or they then become part of the solution. And you always hear people say, you know, what's your mission? What's your mission? You know, really ground the work that you're doing in your mission. But if you even just explore it from a space of curiosity, when I arrived at Earth Justice, we were in the middle of an independent assessment. It was a DEI assessment where someone came in, they looked at our policies, they looked at our practices, they did focus groups, they did one-on-one interviews, all through an equity lens. So one of the most easiest things to do is just to provide some data, just to reflect back to people what the organization looks like, connect that with your mission in terms of where you want it to be, and then just engage them in a conversation. I think it's really hard. You know, I have one friend that says, hey, if they're not with you, leave them behind. And I'm not necessarily, I'm more of like, okay, let's try to engage folks in conversation and a deep strategy that's grounded in data. And then after a period of time, then you need to make a decision. But, you know, I think data is always helpful and it opens people to conversations and to doing some self-reflection.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is, you mentioned a shift in language from partnership to leadership. Can you expand a bit more on how co-leadership might work in an inclusive manner in the management of parks and cultural sites and other kinds of places?
Yeah, I think it is, you know, in terms of when we were going to court, and just in terms of the level of expertise that are in some of these frontline communities, it was really a thoughtful way of thinking about what the relationship looks like and what our job was to do. And our job was to really to connect with communities and the just the knowledge that's already there and the skill set that's there, and those leaders that are really on the front lines, really advocating and doing this work every day, so that we aren't sweeping in at the last minute and kind of like leading this work, but also kind of elevating them and elevating the work that they have been doing in a way that centers them and centers their voices. We're doing a lot of work now on storytelling, like how do we tell the stories of our partners and how do we tell our story in connection to them. So a lot of it was just around elevating the work. And so it says what co-leadership might work and then inclusive, and that feels very inclusive. And I think too, in terms of parks and your cultural sites, just really thinking about the people, thinking about ways that you connect with them. If there's some way to have gather some informal feedback, I don't know, that's through a survey or maybe even setting up some times where you're out in space just talking to people informally about the ways that they're accessing the parks and maybe the cultural significance that it brings to communities. But I think there's a lot of thoughtful things, inclusive things that you can do just by taking the time to create space to hold conversations. I think the fact that, we're heading into the summer and a lot more people will be outdoors. How can you be creative in terms of creating spaces and opportunities to talk about the work, but also to hear from other people? How can you build that into the way that you all work and your function? Really more and more opportunities to listen. And you never know how that will shift the way that you're thinking about your work.
Okay. The next question is, how does your organization link solutions locally with scaling up to solutions at the state, national, and international policy level?
Yeah, wow, that is such a great question. And I think a lot of it goes back to that original, changing the approach around leadership. And then we have, 160 really smart, intelligent lawyers who could answer this better than I can. But, a lot of it is thinking about the policy and think about the advocacy works that happens at those different levels. And also being mindful enough to know that the leaders in those communities have some connections locally, have some connections on the state level, and then maybe, we as a environmental organization through our national network, and also, we do a lot of work internationally in Australia and South Africa, India. So just thinking about the ways that those can connect, and I think that's where this whole notion of being a true partnership, where you really think about your network and the things that you can bring. We are really since last year started to think about the resources, like if in some cases where we aren't able to take on a case, but maybe we're able to connect people with other people in a network. Maybe we're able to fundraise on behalf of our partners. So I think really thinking about the level, those different levels, and how we can lead in those places where we can follow and partner, and also make those connections with folks as well.
The next question is that you mentioned approximately 50% of your membership were minorities. What unique strategies were adopted to realize such a membership composition?
Yeah, again, I'm going to be like a teacher, like DEI 101, like language. Remember I said the language is shifting so much. So now we don't use minorities anymore just because of the negative connotation of being, I'm like, if you're a minority, who's the major? So it just sets up a power dynamic. And so we did, it all goes back to hiring. I'll tell you, we did this really interesting thing that I thought was absurd. When I got there, we asked every single candidate the same question. We have a protocol, like every single candidate is asked the same 12 questions. We aren't allowed to do follow-up unless it's written down. And we're starting to get some feedback that people are asking too many follow-up questions, which doesn't feel equitable when you get to the process where you're talking about candidates. And it's like, hey, well, this person answered 5 follow-ups and you learn a little more. I think there's some flexibility in there, but really looking at our hiring process and how we were screening for applicants and how we were moving them through the process. I mean, even as much as to during COVID, really sticking to phone screens. There were some people who's like, oh, I want to be on video. They're like, no, 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 this is phone. And it was all framed around equity. I'm always learning. I'm the DEI person, but sometimes I think we're like, really, this is equity? Okay, I'll go with it. But it was for equity reasons where people felt like if it's going to be a phone screen, it needs to be a phone screen. It doesn't need to be video because that could, play into our bias and our biases. So streamlining our hiring process, I think, has made a tremendous amount of difference in terms of the people that we have hired, because I think it evens the playing field. When you get to the end of an interview process, you have your two applicants, you've asked them the same questions, you've scored them on the same scale. I mean, there's some conversations that are happening, but it really feels like we're evaluating each one in a really equitable and fair way. And we also, in thinking about recruiting and thinking about where we're looking for people, we've expanded that to kind of look for places that traditionally wouldn't have the people that we're looking for. A lot of that has been expanding to looking at predominantly Black universities, but also looking at in communities more, not changing our profile in terms of, does a lawyer have to go to Yale, or, what does that pedigree look like? So we've just been really open in terms of how we do that.
Now, you might be able to provide more insight on this, especially in the past year or two. You mentioned how Black Lives Matter and other movements have really highlighted the importance of being committed to the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But for some of the employees, I mean, that seems a little abstract, right? So the commitment to diversity. So like, what does that mean? What action should people be taking if they have a commitment to diversity?
I'm sorry, what was what actions, I missed the last part of that.
Yeah, what action should they be taking if they want to demonstrate a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, I think, what's really been resonating with across, this work has been this whole notion of looking internally, like looking at your organization. What are the ways in which we are practicing our policies and practices are equitable, and where are the places where they don't feel equitable? So doing like building in some self-reflection time to really say, hey, what does this look like? Are we, as our board participation, are we doing that in an equitable way? And I'll tell you, our board was really leading the way. I mean, even before 2020, the summer of 2020, we were in November of 2019 talking about what were the expectations of what it meant to be a governance committee? What is it meant to be on the finance committee? Looking at DEI through the full function of our board and saying, okay, where can we be better? They started to think about term limits. We need to have term limits. Is this too long? Is it too much? We even had, some of our white board members saying, I need to give up my space for a woman of color. And then he said, no, I want a Black woman. He said, no, I want a Black lawyer, female lawyer to take my space. So really being that thoughtful in terms of looking around, looking at the policies, looking at the practices and just the norms of the organization through an equity lens. And hopefully that's something that doesn't feel, that can be done, and I think in a way that people don't feel defensive. You're just looking through at your policies and practices and says, hey, are we centering equity inclusion here? Are we really being thoughtful? Are we mapping out the ways in which we function? And I think, something that really stood with me, in thinking about this, I had someone say to me, I work in development. I'm a Black woman. And she said, I don't look traditionally like the person that they send out to raise millions of dollars. And she said, they sent me to a predominantly white conservative area to raise, millions of dollars. And she said, it took me longer. I mean, looking at the timelines, right? And looking at the amount of time that we have people to raise. She said, it took me longer to establish these relationships, because I was, an African American. I was also a female, and I was going to this really conservative space that really, it took them a while to warm up to me. And so she said, is it fair for, my boss to then look at these timelines and compare me to someone who, for example, is not a Black woman who's going to this space and who's easily welcomed into these social circles. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so we started to think about, how are we setting people up to be successful? It doesn't mean that, we would not advocate for people and to only go where they are like people, but we really want to be thoughtful in terms of the challenges and the obstacles that we're putting in our staff's way when they're out there raising money on behalf of Earth Justice, and also making sure that they're safe. And at the same time, we made sure that we were able, if we met someone and they were completely saying, hey, I don't want to deal with you for whatever identity reasons, that we were able to follow up and have the conversations about what our priorities were around diversity, equity, inclusion, what our priorities and visions and missions is around identity, so that we're also educating people at the same time. And we've gone as far as our finance office is now looking at the people that we partner with and asking them about their diversity initiatives. And it was so like, if you don't have this, we're not going to deal with you. And I was like, wait, why don't we, create a space for conversation? If people, are new to this, being really thoughtful and focused on this work, why don't we give them the opportunity to grow and to learn with us? And if they're completely resistant to that, we can think about new ways to partner. But I do think that any time that we can stop and build in a thoughtful process to internally look at how we do things, that would be helpful.
Thank you. So we do need to wrap up. Philip, if we want to contact you, what's the best way of doing so?
Dave has all my information.
Okay, good.
Anytime. I really do. I mean, I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll be out and back into the world soon. But I'm always there and available, and love to again share with you any resources that you need, and to be a thoughtful person to engage with.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. All right. Have a good day. I'm gonna go. My dog is under my desk kicking me, so it's time to. That's my clue to get outside. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Philip, and we will be in touch.
Please do.
And
no bother at all.
Yep, bye-bye. And we did talk to, we do have Carolyn Finney. She's written for us already.
Oh, good.
Journal.
Yeah. I'll send that talk. It's so great. She's so great, and would love to make those connections as well.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you, Dave, for reaching out. You're welcome. Nice to meet everyone.
Bye. Okay, and thank you, Mariella, for your help. Well, what we want to do now is move on to the section where we'll talk about highlights of the work that we've been doing over the past couple of years. As I mentioned, since the last biennial call that we've had, a lot of has happened. And I should say one of the things that's happened is that Dave Harmon came back as executive director, at first part-time, and frankly, because we had such a small number of people in the membership that we felt it was better to start off an executive part-time and then work our way up, and we have been doing that. We recruited people on the board, and most significantly, from 2019 to 2020, we developed a strategic plan called the Strategic Directions, based on the 4 points of the compass. And you can see we've fit those actions into these 4 areas. George Wright is a convener and innovator. George Wright connecting people to nature, financial sustainability, and the Park Stewardship Forum, which is our flagship product that we have developed in collaboration with the University of California in Berkeley.
Dave, sorry to interrupt. Can you start sharing your screen again, please?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought I had done that. All right.
Yeah, and you can put it up on that 3rd slide with the strategic directions.
Yeah. Hold on. All right. That's it. How's that? All right.
Great. Thanks, Dave.
All right. At any rate, we have finished the strategic corrections plan. Those of you who've signed up should have received a copy. If not, we'd be more than happy to send you a copy of that. There's two versions, the full version, and then we have a summary version as well. Just a point on this, we have, so we're going to move into the different board members talking about some different highlights that we've been working on. But before I do, I wanted to encourage you to listen to these highlights, read the strategic plan, and then think to yourselves, how might I become involved? What are the areas that are of interest to me? Or do I know somebody who may be interested in helping out? Do I know possible partners that might be able to help? Do I know possible foundations that would be interested in this aspect or that aspect? And if you do know, and if you do want to get involved, contact Dave. And then lastly, we are more than happy to have people come on as advisors or also as committee members on some of the committees. And of course, when elections time comes up, we'd be more than happy to have people run for our board too, when the board times come up, board slots come open. So what I will do now is move on to the next slide, which is Terry Thomas. Now, Dave, did you want to cover that for Terry? I think Terry had to step out.
Yeah, I can do that, Dave. Yeah, Terry is having an issue, I think, with her plumbing at her house, and she had to step away. That she's unable to do this. But yeah, we're just gonna give you guys some brief highlights of what we've accomplished since January of last year, like Dave said. And so we're just going to step through some slides really quickly to give you an overview of what's happening. So one of the things that comes under our GWS as a convener and innovator direction is that we're trying to organize regional and thematic meetings that advance our mission. And so the example that we've just completed in February of this year is a workshop on wildfire management in California and how to try to prevent the catastrophic wildfires that have been happening in that state. And so we put together, went through a whole bunch of different machinations because we're going to have this as an in-person meeting. Last year, COVID intervened. We had to retool it a couple of times. We finally gave it as an all virtual meeting in February of this year. And it was very much a hands-on kind of meeting with some results-oriented meeting. We actually stepped through 3 collaborative on-the-ground projects and got those off the ground that were centered on the areas around Yosemite National Park, around Sequoia Kings Canyon National Parks, and in San Diego County, California. And these are collaborative projects to increase the amount of prescribed burning and other kind of fuels treatments that are going to be necessary to reduce the fuel loads in California and hopefully stop these gigantic and destructive catastrophic wildfires that we've seen in the last few years. So there's 100 participants in these 3 working sessions. We also had some live stream plenaries that bookended those sessions. I had about 100 people viewing those. And one of the most significant things in a long time, people who've known George Wright Society for a long time will see this, is we made some connections between what's always been our core group, the National Park Service, and people associated with the Park Service, but with other agencies like the U.S. Forest Service, CAL FIRE, which is the California state agency that manages wildfire, and some NGOs that are out there in California that we have not had connections to. So we're trying to expand our horizons that way. And that I think this Fire Management 24/7 365, that was the title. That workshop did that for us, and we got a lot of positive feedback on it. So that's the example, Dave, on this one, and just wanted to share that with folks. And when we get to the question and answer session at the end of the meeting, you'll be happy to answer any questions about this and the other projects. So that's what I had to say about that, Dave.
All right, thank you. The next discussion we have is with Nadine Spence on the reinvigorating the Indigenous Involvement Working Group.
Thanks, Dave. So I will be brief, but just for everyone's situational awareness that Kalani and I have been collaborating to reinvigorate the Indigenous Involvement Working Group, which we undertook some work this past October that has resulted in a very active reinvigorated group that hosts monthly calls. And the intent of those calls is really to focus in on Indigenous leadership and conservation broadly, and particularly as it intersects with our strategic directions document. So on a monthly basis, we've had some very excellent presenters and conversations around things such as Indigenous cultural use of fires, ethical space, and kind of the differences in perspectives, knowledge perspectives around terminology and language, such as stewardship versus Indigenous worldviews that speak more to interrelationships. So it's been an excellent highlight of the month for me personally. And we meet monthly, the last Wednesday or Thursday of each month, and we will take a break over the summer months, given that a lot of our participants are practitioners, and we're happy to welcome participants from both sides of the border, both Canadian and American participants. And if you know of others who are interested in joining those dialogue sessions, we invite you to reach out and let us know, and we'd be happy to add you to the distribution list. That's it.
Thank you. The next person that we have presenting is Akibia Hicks on student involvement.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. Firstly, thank you to Dr. Peterson and the Days for the support with planning the summit. Many thanks to Dr. Thompson, Nadine, Dr. Peterson, and Kalani for assisting in recruiting the students. So the summit this year was for 2 Saturdays. The first Saturday, we had 4 panelists who the students really enjoyed. 2 of the panelists were Kalani and Dr. Fernandez. I am still receiving emails from students about the panelists and asking how they can connect with them, et cetera. So that's really good to see. Dr. Walton on the board also joined us on the first day as a participant. This year we had 42 students, if I'm not mistaken, participate, and from 14 different universities. The goal of the Student Summit is just for graduate students to come together and produce articles for the Park Stewardship Forum. The summit is student-led, and this year students were divided into groups of 6 or 7 based on research interests, shared research interests. The topics the students were writing about this year ranged from, and I may miss some, I think park accessibility, biodiversity protection, tribal affiliations with parks and protected areas, equity and access to green spaces, community inclusion and planning, and I think health benefits of natural areas. So that went really well. I honestly cannot thank Kalani enough for all of his help. He showed up both days of the summit. The first day he showed up as a panelist, and the second day he showed up as a participant to support the Indigenous students in the summit. I asked Kalani maybe like 2 days before the summit if he wanted to just like let a Clemson student lead the group of Indigenous students, and he was like, no, like I'm a student, I love to participate. So Kalani's not only helping facilitate the discussions, but he's also writing with the students as well as a PhD student. And honestly, this is what diversity and inclusion is all about. It's not about only recruiting these diverse students from these diverse populations, but also taking the time to step in and support them as well. So I am really grateful for that. I was able to see a few outlines and abstracts from some of the groups this year, and I'm just really excited to see the final papers. The first day they did a little bit of brainstorming and, building their outline. A lot of the groups spent most of the time, talking a little bit about the panel discussions and trying to weave some of the panel discussion key points into their papers. And the second day of the summit, which was this past Saturday, second and last day, the students got together, before the end of the summit. I said, hey, goal for today is to have an abstract, have a finished outline, decide, who's writing what, decide on the title of your thought piece. And all of the groups were able to do that. So I'm just really excited about this.
Thank you, Kivia. Yeah, it is exciting to have the expansion of the student summits. Thanks for your work on that. Next person we have talking, board member, is Jen Thompson.
Hi, everyone. And thanks again to Kivia, Kalani, and Brian putting together that summit, especially virtually. I've heard from my students who participated how great it's been. And I know so much work went into it. So really wonderful to see the outcomes of that. I'm going to just briefly kind of build a bit on these points on the action item to contribute to diversity and protected area workforce and larger conservation community. And this has been really an effort on how can we really diversify and be more inclusive in our membership. Also recognizing a lot of the systemic racism that has been raised to the surface over this past year, which hopefully a lot of you were able to see in the open letter from George Wright Society in June this past year. But beyond that, the George Wright Society board is really trying to target membership that reflects the diversity of the public. And so really, of course, trying to stay engaged with our current membership, but really be thinking into the future and how can we have unique strategies and make sure that we're covering topics that are really relevant and to the emerging issues and also just ongoing issues, but also being attractive to different perspectives and populations. So with this, some of this is coming through the Park Stewardship Forum, through different special issues or topics, or even just like Akibia was saying, alignment with this younger generation coming from the Student Summit and their outputs. We're also putting together a webinar series, which was jump-started by the panelists in the Student Summit that just recently occurred, but we're also planning 2 other additional webinars, which will be open to our membership and the public, one focused on diversity and inclusion in protected areas, but a specific focus on LGBTQIA community. And so we'll have speakers speaking from those perspectives, and then how do we think about this population in being inclusive in the context of protected areas conservation and the broader topical areas that the George Wright Society and their members work in. The last webinar series, which most likely will be in October, is another exciting one. The title will be 10 Calls to Action for Scientists to Support Reconciliation Between Indigenous and Non-Indigenous Populations. And this was an article actually published by Indigenous and non-Indigenous scientists. And they will be, those authors will also be sharing their findings, but leading this discussion, and it'll include Indigenous populations. And so we're really excited about this webinar series. We're really hoping that this can be a continuous thing that George Wright Society offers, and that we can, of course, change topics, rotate topics each year, and really have that then lead into potentially new members being attracted, or at least more aware of George Wright Society and the different areas we focus on. So thank you.
Thanks, Jen. And I guess I should mention to the membership that Jen learned that she became a tenured professor about a month ago. So congratulations again.
Thanks so much.
Mike Walton is next, talking about fiscal oversight.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. I wanted to share some messages of reassurance and certainty, and those are simply that we are regularly meeting to pay attention to the fiscal realities of the organization. We have a splendid board of public, private sector, as well as nonprofit sector experience, providing fiscal oversight. We are continuously taking a look at expenditure reports provided to us and making sure that we're understanding what's being spent, as well as the issue of revenues. And I think an important part of what's happened is a requirement for annual audit to occur that's been undertaken. And that's really getting ready to be competitive in the world of submitting grants and looking for sources of continued funding. So we're pleased to have that in place as well. So we, on behalf of that little group, we're very pleased with the progress we made. And again, messages of certainty and confidence around what's happening with the board. And I did want to acknowledge and shout out for all of those involved with the Student Summit. That was really an exciting event, and I'm pleased that I was able to participate. So it's wonderful to see the society moving in this direction, and all of the work being done on equity, diversity, and inclusiveness is tremendous. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Okay, Bill Walker is going to talk about sustainable funding.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. And just building on some of the messages that Mike just shared, I think it's appropriate for us to talk about sustainable funding model in the context of programming. And so it's exciting to spotlight things like the Student Summit. As you know, we are trying to increase and diversify the revenue streams that we have coming in part because the landscape has changed from the way that things have historically functioned for the George Wright Society. And so we're looking for options that don't require the biannual meeting, or that aren't reliant on the biannual meeting. Probably the biggest news that I think everyone's aware of is in August 2020, we did receive a $300,000 legacy gift from longtime supporters of the Society. This is a terrifically significant gift in the way that we're operating. It is unrestricted, but we're in an effort to really be mindful and good stewards of the gift. We've set it up in a manner so that it functions similar to endowment, where we're being mindful of drawing off funds as they're available, as interest accrues. But probably the biggest significant news of the past year. We'll also be extending, because this was a legacy gift, we'll be extending, sharing more news about legacy giving in general with membership and supporters. So be on the lookout for information about that. If you're interested in recognizing the Society in your long-term planning, we'll be providing more information about that as the year progresses. In addition to giving, we'll be looking at some earned income streams. You've already heard a little bit about the 24/7, 365 Fire Summit. Things like that, online initiatives, programs, small regional meetings. Those are all topics of regular conversation and directions that we see for being able to move forward regarding earned income. How can we use our membership to live up to our mission, right? Our goal is to build those collaborative opportunities. And if we can't do it necessarily the way we've done in the past, there are lots of other ways to do it. And I think the last year with COVID has really shown us that there are broader opportunities out there. We'll also be completing our 3-year pledge commitments from George Melinda's Wright Circle members. Again, so be on the lookout. Those are completing this year. And as Mike alluded to, we are beginning to research foundations, funders, other income sources beyond membership fundraising. So our committees have been looking closely at what options might be available that align with the mission of our organization. Dave?
Thanks, Bill.
And back to you.
Great. Brian Peterson will now talk about the journal, the Park Stewardship Forum.
Hi, everyone. So we launched the Park Stewardship Journal, and that was launched in January of 2020. And there's been 4 issues published thus far. And we got a 5th one coming out very soon on May 15th. And our journal is co-published with the University of California, Berkeley's Institute for Parks, People, and Diversity. And it's an open access, all digital format that's published on 2 websites. And it offers peer-reviewed papers and non-peer-reviewed papers. Our peer-reviewed papers, we call those advances in research and management, and our non-peer-reviewed we call new perspectives. And we also have a couple regular opinion columns. One is the photographer's frame, which is a regular photo essay feature. And the other one is verse in place poetry, which is also a regular feature that shares a poem about place. Also published in the Park Stewardship Forum is the publications that come out of the Student Summit that Akibia discussed. And those publications will go into the Park Stewardship Forum and should probably come out in about the September edition. And our impact to date, so far we've had over 800 pages of content published. We've had 32,500 requests for content and 8,200 downloads. So thank you.
Yeah, very impressive. Thank you. And then we have Kalani Kyocho to talk a little bit more about the journal.
Well, mahalo, Dave, and mahalo, Brian, for continuing the PSF, the Park Stewardship Forum action item that we're focusing on. And as you all know, the Park Stewardship Forum is an interdisciplinary journal. Dave Harmon and Dean Spence and I serve as the George Wright Society's representatives from the board for the editorial board. So thank you so much for your service. As well, we're looking at, creating this diversity of topics that really establish that presence through this interdisciplinary forum. And so the first inaugural issue focused on climate change and adapting to new realities, such as vanishing coastal parks, and how are we designing climate resilience for people and nature at the landscape scale, and focusing on place-based solutions that draw upon the strengths of people and place. The May 2020 issue focused on our national parks as classrooms, and the issue highlighted the need to expand access to more in-place learners. The September 2020 issue focused on humanizing the seas and ocean literacy, allowed us to bring bring this attention to the people as far as ocean, its environment, and the human connections to people and place. This January 2021 issue focused on the nature and health connection. It was spearheaded by the Healthy Parks, Healthy People movement. And this issue focused specifically on the relationship between public health, nature, parks, and highlighted the emerging knowledge that informs new policy directions in this area. The May 2021 issue that's coming out on the 15th will focus on collaborative leadership and landscape conservation, and examples and principles from a number of projects that show the way that we can better our partnerships in managing at the landscape scale. And this is connecting to what Philip had shared with us as far as terminology. How are we identifying our partnerships? Upcoming in the next calendar year, September 2021, it will focus on the science and policy of landscape conservation. And this is the journal, or this is the issue that will highlight the student forum contributions. And I'm really excited about this one too, because we have, I think, over 12 universities represented in our students forum. And then January 2022, focusing on geoconservation, will highlight the emerging science of protection of a whole range of geological resources. And then in May 2022, the issue will focus on indigenous-led marine conservation, and will create a space to share stories about the diverse ways that indigenous peoples have led and continue to lead place-based marine conservation. And we're also excited about this one because in June of 2022, Canada is hosting the 5th annual IUCN International Marine Protected Area Congress, also known as Impact 5. And we plan to connect this issue with Impact 5 since Indigenous leadership is a main focus of the Congress. So a lot of exciting things happening, and so grateful to be a part of it. Mahalo.
Yeah. Mahalo, Kalani. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is open it up to questions, and Rick Harris would do that. And I think to do that, I can't see questions on my screen, so I will stop share and allow Rick to open it up and open up the panelists. Rick does have some feedback. That's what you hear. It's not the ocean.
I can't hear it. I don't know where it's coming from, but I wish it was the ocean or any water for that matter, because I live in southern New Mexico. But yeah, I guess if people have questions, you can type them into the chat and I'll follow there. And if you have specifically somebody that you would like to direct that question to on the board, please list that in your question. So I'll just open it up for anybody that would like to type a question into chat, and I'll wait. And as soon as those questions start to arrive, we can field those individually, or any board member, feel free to raise your hand or take yourself off mute to do that.
So Rick, looking in the chat, do you see the question from Marty Lester, 309? Have you got your chat up there? Because I see one question already.
Where did that? I don't. Where in the chat?
It's in the chat, about three up. I could read it to you if you want.
Yeah, because I'm looking at a different time than you are. It's to me, I've got one.
Okay. Well, Marty is a participant, member of the audience. Thanks, Marty, for being here. She says, I'm interested in an expansion on the comment about the discussion around the word stewardship and more the indigenous word interrelationships and how that might be playing out or maybe will play out. And maybe Nadine, could I ask you perhaps to address that? And maybe Kalani, if you want to join in, because we actually had an Indigenous Involvement Working Group discussion about the term stewardship and interrelationships, and a guest speaker, an Indigenous woman named Kat High, addressed the Indigenous Involvement Working Group on that very topic. So Nadine, do you want to just say a few words about that, or perhaps expand on some of the stuff that Kat was saying, if that's possible?
Yeah, you bet, Dave, and I'll ask Kalani to please add on. I'll draw from my memory here, but Kat did provide a fascinating presentation to the group and the rest of the group, many of whom are Indigenous peoples from both Canada and the United States, engaged in a really active dialogue about this concept of language and the language that we use to describe our work and activities. And so stewardship has, of course, its roots in kind of a Western knowledge system, or a knowledge system that's not Indigenous. And as a consequence, in some ways compartmentalizes, discrete elements of knowledge in a way that is not reflective of Indigenous ways of knowing. And in particular, like a particular example would be kind of the role of people in the environment, or people as part of the environment. And by contrast, and Kat spoke really eloquently and provided lots of great examples about Indigenous knowledge systems that really underscore the importance about relationships and interrelationships, and this whole system of reciprocity with nature in a way in which speaks to a lack of power dynamics. So not being so human-centric and not having humans kind of at the center of that power dynamic, but rather in relation with both animate and inanimate objects kind of in nature, that requires us to have both rights and responsibilities for our relationships with things. So in my own culture, I could share. So I'm a Haudenosaunee channel from the west coast of Vancouver Island in British Columbia, you know, we often kind of pick out like really discrete elements such as hunting, and we kind of look at hunting as an activity through kind of a modern view, if you will. When an Indigenous person is undertaking an activity that includes harvesting of some type, you know, there's a whole degree of ceremony, acknowledgement, and recognition of what you're taking, giving thanks, that precedes the activity itself. And then following the activity, there is once again kind of a ceremony and practices that support the relationship between, say, a fish, like a salmon, like a sockeye, and yourself, in terms of that fish giving its life for the sustenance of yourself and your family. And so the maintenance of that relationship is so critical to the kind of the continuation of cultures and the knowledge systems, Indigenous cultures and knowledge systems, such that it changes the kind of power dynamic in terms of the way in which you interact with the natural world. So appreciate that's probably really tips of the wave high scale without getting into deep kind of philosophical elements of that discussion. But Kalani, I'm wondering if you have more to add.
Yeah, that was beautiful, Mahalo Nadine. It resonates with me, and I'll just continue sharing a little bit of the stories, but linking together some of the points that Nadine shared about value systems connected to knowledge systems, but even language as a proxy of all of those things. I find it very important to engage with the multiple languages that connect to those systems. So maybe repurposing the word recreation to mean recreation from an Indigenous point of view, or looking at fishing like the hunting example in a different perspective as having those rights and responsibilities expressed very uniquely in different places. So that definitely resonates with me. And as we figure out how to maybe reappropriate terms that we've used or to revitalize and to imbue all of that meaning into the way that we use language moving forward, I think a lot of that is happening right now with what we are experiencing today. So mahalo for that.
All right, let's see. Next question, I think that either Dave Harmon or Emily can probably answer this question quickly. What is the total membership currently of the George Wright Society?
Yeah, it's Dave here. Thank you, Colmar, for that question. I'm going to this is a good time to introduce Emily Decker-Fiala to everybody. She's the person who works with me here in the executive office in Michigan and has been with the George Wright Society for over 20 years. She's our membership coordinator. And if you remember the George Wright Society biennial conferences, she was the key registrar and organizer of that. So Emily, can you just give Colmar a quick overview of how many members we have and kind of the categories, please?
Well, we are around 300, and I say around because we're still in sort of the middle of getting renewals in for this year. So there's some that are a little iffy. That is and it's been at that level for the last couple of years. And some of you may know, I mean, our peak membership was much higher than that, but a lot of people joined when we were having our biennial conferences so they could get the member rate. And we've lost quite a few people and institutional members since we haven't been able to do the conferences. So we are at a low right now. We have about, I think, 128 life members.
Great, thank you, Emily.
Okay. All right, the next question is lots of special issues for Park Science Forum, which is great. Is there still capacity for individual article or topic submissions? That's the first part of the question. So is anybody, there's two parts to this question here. So anybody that wants to take that first part of the question on, is there still capacity for individual article or topic submissions?
Yeah, thanks, Rick, and thank you, Jeffrey, for that question. This is Dave Harmon again. I'm one of the two co-managing editors for Park Stewardship Forum, and so we're the people who actually manage the submissions and the reviews for the peer reviews and that sort of thing. And so the answer to your question is yes. There's always the capacity for individual article or even theme topical submissions on our website at georgewrightsociety.org. Under the publications link, you'll find a link to the Park Stewardship Forum and how you submit to the journal. And you can always give me a call or write to me here at the headquarters if you have special or questions about that. But it's open all the time. So rolling submissions, and if your article is approved and for publication, we try to publish it in the first available issue after that. Oh, you're muted, Rick.
Trying to stay muted, I guess, but how many issues per year, and is there a lag time for those issues given the number of SIs or our individual topics also included in each issue?
Yeah, there are three issues each year. They come out in January, May, and September. Again, this is an all digital publication and it's open access. So anybody anywhere in the world can access this. As was mentioned during the primary presentation, we have it on a couple different websites. The lag time, I would say that the lag time between when an article is submitted and when it's published is less than a year in normal times. For some of our peer-reviewed papers that had to be revised, it went over a little bit over a year. But generally, we try to do this in an expeditious fashion and get things published as quickly as possible. And then the individual topics are included in each issue. Yeah, the theme issues or the themes for each issue are decided by the governing editorial board of the journal. And as was mentioned before, there are representatives from the George Wright Society on that editorial board. There's also representatives from the UC Berkeley Institute for Parks, People, and Biodiversity, our co-publisher. And so you can anyone can submit an idea for a theme issue. We would then run that by the editorial board to see if they would approve it or not. So, but we're always looking for themes. We're always looking for articles, and so we welcome any submissions that anybody might have in either category.
Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions. Dave Harmon, maybe you're picking up on something I'm not, but I'm not seeing.
I don't see anything else, Rick.
Yeah.
So I guess we could turn it back to Dave to close out.
All right, thank you, Rick. Really appreciate that. And thank you everyone for joining. I wanted to say two things. One, keep us in mind, when you talk to your friends and when you're talking to people who are interested in publishing as well and writing. The other thing I wanted to say is that I realized I neglected to have Dave and Emily be introduced along with the board. We're not taking you for granted, Dave. I just assumed everybody knew Dave Harmon. It's like, who doesn't know him? But I do want to say that both Dave and Emily are the glue that hold the whole organization together, and they just do an amazing job, and still make it look pretty easy, even though it's not. So thanks, Dave and Emily, for all the work that you do.
Thank you, Dave. And may I just add one other word of thanks to a person who was on the call earlier. Dr. Rebecca Connard is my co-managing editor at the Park Stewardship Forum, and she is a longtime George Wright member and a volunteer who does that work and does a lot of hard work. And so I just wanted to recognize Rebecca here too.
Okay, so if there are any other points that people on the panel or the board want to make, let me know. If not, I want to thank everybody for their input. I think it was very successful, very useful, and very interesting panel, and very interesting membership meeting. And we learned a lot. With that, I guess we'll sign off.
Yeah, I'll just
Appreciate
add
it.
in closing to thank everybody as well, Dave. I want to thank all the board members for all the work that you guys have been doing. It's been really great working with everyone. And to all the attendees, I just want to mention again, I will email you a link to the strategic directions document so you can take a look at that in more detail. And just thanks to everybody for being a George Wright member.
And the recording will be posted on our website.
Yep, we'll have to do some editing of the preliminaries and we'll have to figure that out. But we'll also post that probably in the next digital newsletter that we send out, the GWS News and Notes. We'll have a link to it. It'll be on our George Wright Study YouTube channel.
Okay. All right. Thanks. So you're in control, Dave.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody again for attending. Dave, thank you for emceeing this, and really glad that you guys could spend some time with us this afternoon.